latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome. You're on Strat News Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. Every week we try to bring you new books and new authors and have a chat with the authors, trying to understand the philosophy behind the book or why they actually took up this subject, and try and give you a glimpse into the way authors research such books. You're on Books Corner, and my guest this evening is Parag Khanna. He'll be joining us live from Singapore, and this is your weekly feature, Books Corner. So, as I said, my guest this evening is Parag Khanna, author of many acclaimed books. But his latest book, Move, which you can see behind him, is about how mass migration will reshape the world and what it means for you and me. Parag, welcome to this program. First up, how long did you take to write this book, and why this book?
Oh, it's very nice to see you again, Nitin. Thanks so much for having me on. And I think this is my first conversation live with India about this book. So I'm very excited. India and Indians play a very central role in it. This book is basically a sequel to Connectography. Connectography was where I mapped out global infrastructure and supply chains and how those are a tool, how connectivity is a tool of geopolitics. What I wanted to do here, and that's what's called functional geography. What I wanted to do was a sequel about human geography. What do we do with all of this connectivity? Where will we live in 2030, 2040, 2050? I set out to answer that one question, which you know is not a simple one. It turned out not to be a linear pathway, but rather a very meandering path to map out the future of human geography. And I wanted to do this because climate change is forcing people to migrate, because economic disruption, geopolitics, civil wars are forcing people to migrate, and because digitization is allowing people to move and live and work anywhere, and because the world population is reaching a plateau. And it seemed to me that instead of a population of 15 billion people, as we now know, the world population will level off at about 8.59 billion people. So I asked myself, where will those 9 billion people be in 2050? And let's reverse engineer the path from 2020 to 2050.
That's a great, beginning or a base for such a book. In fact, you also speak about how various factors contribute to this migration. I mean, of course, climate change is the new factor, but there are pulls and pressures. A pull and push model for migration, and for centuries human beings have migrated. But what in your view is one big reason for migration in the 21st century?
So as you said, we have had in the 20th century, economics and politics dominated migration, right? You had people expelled because of genocides, you had the partition of India and Pakistan, you had, of course, World War II in Europe, but mostly it was actually economic migrants. Right? Hundreds of millions of people became economic migrants, right? Myself, I was born in India. My family migrated to the Gulf countries, then migrated to the United States. Very typical story. The Turks in Germany, the Latin Americans in the United States. A lot of that really accelerated in the late 20th century. We didn't talk about climate migration in the 20th century, though, did we, Nitin? Now we realize today, Today, the number of climate migrants, climate refugees, and so forth exceeds all other categories of migrants. And you can see where the line is going. It's not going to stop, which is why I emphasize so much in this book and in my advocacy, climate adaptation. If you look at the COP26 summit, everyone is focused on mitigation, reducing emissions, which is extremely important. We should do 10 times more on that also. But the world has zero strategy, Nitin, zero for climate adaptation. And Asia sits front and center in this problem. You don't expect America or England or Canada to solve the problem of climate adaptation for Asia But is there an Asian strategy for 5 billion people? There is not. And so part of me also wanted to answer this question. What is Asia going to do about climate adaptation, since Asia is where most of those 9 billion people are?
Oh, indeed. In fact, the climate change thing, there are two countries that come to mind immediately. One is Maldives, the second is Bangladesh. And one of our viewers has asked this question. I always wondered where Maldivians would go. Rekha Pai is asking. And I don't think we have the answer, but I would still want you to venture an answer if you want to.
There is only one country so far that has offered a climate visa program, and that is New Zealand. New Zealand has said that the residents of the islands, of the Pacific Islands, of Oceania, whether it's Tonga or Nauru or Kiribati, whatever the case may be, they are welcome to seek refuge, to relocate to New Zealand. They will be given permanent residency rights and eventually probably become citizens of New Zealand. So only one country has said, this is the policy, we will do it. This is our generous gesture. Obviously, the combined population of Oceania is not much. The same is, of course, true of the Maldives. And obviously, India should be extending exactly the same kind of offer to all of the people of the Maldives. It should do it. It could do it. The only question is when it will do it.
That's right. I think that call will have to be taken whenever one thinks of planning for that eventuality. Since Maldivians themselves know that this is going to be the grim future that they face. Similarly with Bangladesh, I think they've had economic migration in the 20th century, early 20th century, lasting up to about the last decade of the 20th century. But now they might be facing climate migrations so much. But there is also the other migration you speak about, Parag, which is what I'm fascinated with. In the 60s and the 70s, technology savvy or brilliant Indians migrated to the UK and then to the US in large numbers, all IIT products, engineers, doctors, all of them. But in the gig economy or in the current phase and the future phase, how much would the Indians be welcomed in these countries, especially in Europe or in the US? What's your prognosis?
The answer is very welcome. But let me also mention, I have a section about Bangladesh in the book, and it's very, very paradoxical what will happen, and I explain it in the book. Right now, you have the ethnic Bengali Rohingya who have been forced out of Myanmar back into Bangladesh, right? But in the future, because Bangladesh is not climate resilient, but the uplands, the highlands of Myanmar are, I actually expect Bangladeshis to migrate into Myanmar. And I have a whole explanation of this process. So it's one of the, what I call climate oases of the world, is the upper peninsular Southeast Asian region, which is not very populated today. Now, here's the fun part, actually. In this book, I have a whole thing about India and Indians and how, Indians, we have been the second largest diaspora in the world, right? Always behind the Chinese. But the Chinese diaspora has been concentrated in the Pacific Rim. The Indian diaspora has been completely global, right? And I have a diagram about this in the book. Now, I am fully confident that in the next 20, 30 years, the Indian diaspora will be much, much larger than the Chinese diaspora for many reasons. India is much younger demographically. The geopolitical suspicion of China is so acute. Chinese are going back to China, whereas Indians continue to move out. The labor shortages that OECD countries have, that Japan, Australia, Europe, United States, Canada, the labor shortages are in nursing, in healthcare, medicine, in IT, precisely the areas that Indians excel at, right? And where you need an English-speaking, young English-speaking migrant labor force. So I give stories about this in the book, where I go to tech companies in Europe, and they're full of Indians. So this is already happening. And so I actually talk about what I call Asian Europeans. Now, I grew up, Nitin, as you know, I grew up as an Asian American. And there is no term Asian European. It doesn't exist because there's only 3.5, 4 million Asian Europeans. It's almost like they were accidentally there, right? Like every now and then you meet an Indian, like, carpet dealer in Hamburg or a diamond dealer in Amsterdam, right? That adds up to a couple of million. You've got Bengali grocers in Italy. But now, Nitin, I'm talking about 20, 30, 40 million Desis, Chinese, Vietnamese, Indonesian, Thais. They'll all be moving to Europe.
Oh, true. In fact, I think your chapter is called Asia. The Asians are coming. The future is brownish.
Yes.
And that's true. Actually, wherever you go, you see that. But there is also this other thing that you speak about in the book or write about in the book is about the air-conditioned nations, Dubai,
Yes.
Singapore, where you live currently. The whole issue is that they have managed to create urban spaces to live for people migrating from various multicultural societies or even distant lands. Is that the future, or is something going to change there in these nation states?
Well, not every country can afford to do this. I give the examples of Singapore and the United Arab Emirates. These are small countries. The population of Singapore is barely, not even 6 million people. The population of the UAE is 10 million people. The UAE is building the capacity to potentially be a country of 20 million people. But Nitin, the number of people facing heat stress and water stress and drought risk, and who need to be in air-conditioned environments or cooler environments, Nitin, that's hundreds of millions of people. That's billions of people. So, you have to, one of the punchlines of the book is you either move people to resources or technologies to people. Otherwise, we all die. It's really that simple. People to resources or technology to people. So you either spread sustainable architecture so that you are channeling the wind, to cool common spaces for people to remain cool in the heat, or they die, right? Or you move resources to people. And I also write in the book about Kazakhstan, I say it's the reverse Mughal Empire, right? The number of Indians moving north to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, I go to these countries all the time. And I keep on seeing the growing population of Indians. And I'm like, it's English teachers, it's dentists, it's tour guides, it's cooks. For one reason or the other, it's really reverse Mughalization going on in a way.
Of the Central Asian republics, yes.
But look, the sad truth is that India is a very water-stressed country, and people do need to move away from pollution, from looking for better jobs. And Russia needs farmers. Russia needs construction workers. All of the during the pandemic, during the lockdown, people think the world stood still. Actually, the largest movement of human beings in the world during the lockdown was Indians in India, of course, during this tragic episode where the Prime Minister gave very little time and people just had to return to their villages. But the largest international flow of people in the world was, of course, Indians leaving Saudi Arabia and the UAE when the construction project stalled and moving back to India. So movement was always happening, and Indians are the most assimilating people in the world in terms of the size of the diaspora. Filipinos are very good too, but the Filipinos are not nearly as distributed as the Indians.
You call them multinational maids, in fact, in the book. I read that. And yes, they're all over the place, especially in the Gulf. You will find them in large numbers. But you also speak about something that happened during the pandemic in the United States. A lot of people have left the United States for smaller countries or countries which have better resilience, perhaps. I do not know what the exact causes were. Maybe they just wanted to get away from the competition in their own lives, whatever. But even that you have noticed in your book, and which is something which is remarkable, I would think.
There are many reasons. So the number of American expats, people like me, right, has doubled since the mid-2000s. So it predates the financial crisis, but accelerated after the financial crisis. Student debt, looking for a lower cost of life, rise of emerging markets, just interesting opportunities, lifestyle change, right? The growing livability and appeal of being in Asia and Eastern Europe, all of these things. Now you have tax competition, right? So young, talented people saying, I'm going to be a nomad here. I'm going to be in Bali, Phuket, Dubai, Slovenia, Estonia, you name it, Panama. All of these countries are reaching out to attract young Americans and young Europeans. In the book, I write about Tbilisi in Georgia, right? Packed with young people from all over the world, who are going into a super cheap place. It's like East Berlin. It's so lively, great climate. Dubai. If you go to Dubai today, so many young entrepreneurs, they're taking the golden visa. One of the sort of fun facts I have in the book, before the pandemic, how many countries had nomad visa programs? Like 2. Today, Nitin, 75 countries have these nomad visa programs, right? 75 countries have said, you know what, if there's going to be a lockdown, we need people. We need to attract young people. We need people to stay in our hotels, to eat in our restaurants, to use Airbnb or Oyo. We need people just spending money in our economy. Otherwise, our tourism sector will be crushed. So suddenly, overnight, all of these countries started saying we need to attract young entrepreneurs. And so Americans, Europeans, Indians, everyone is taking up this offer. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful trend because it absolutely flies in the face of the notion that the world is ruled by populist, anti-foreign, anti-immigrant kinds of governments. Nothing could be further from the truth, actually. Most governments in the world are highly pragmatic, are desperate for young talent and migrants, and those are the countries that will win.
That's true. One final question, Parag, before I let you go. You've spoken about international situation, international travel, migration, why people are moving. One of the other big developments, if I may say so, in the last decade has been the huge internal migration from rural to urban India and the challenge that India is going to face. I think it's one of the largest, perhaps only the Chinese have matched it in the 80s and the 90s when they were booming. How do you see that challenge India must meet, and what are the complications that may arise in India's governance structure because of that?
So there's no question that India has been rapidly urbanizing, of course, alongside China. And, the India that you and I maybe remember, from a couple of decades ago, there were just 2 economic centers. Today, however, India really has at least 6 or 7 really significant urban hubs, which is a very good thing. Remember that for 7,000 years, there's been one true statement. There's no great power without great cities. And when you have 1.5 billion people, you need great cities. China is building 24 mega urban clusters, right? 24 autonomous, industrious, huge demographically and economically city clusters, right? With great infrastructure, connectivity among themselves as clusters, and then within the country, and then globally. That is what India also has to do, but it has to do so sustainably, right? This is the big difference. We cannot build on arable land. You build on arable land, you're destroying your agriculture and you make yourself vulnerable, right? If you do things with too much cement and concrete, you're destroying your air and you're ruining your resources. You power everything with oil and gas, it's terrible for your current account deficit and it's bad for your environment as well. So India needs to pause and do what I call pre-design. This is what a lot of the book is about, really. How do you pre-design your infrastructure, knowing that people want to move to cities, right? People want to live in cities. They want a good quality of life. They want a pedestrian life. They want to ride their bicycles. They want remote work. They want to live near cafes. They want good food and clean air. Pre-design your cities to do all of those things. Do it sustainably. Do it right. And if India can do that, I tell you, you cannot quantify in advance the benefit that India will enjoy, right? You cannot know in dollars and cents exactly.
You can't.
But it will be such a catalyst for the economy and the health of the society to do it in this way.
And so the good news, Parag, here is while the migration numbers are increasing, I think, excuse me, I think the Urban Development Ministry is actually on the job and has phenomenal plans. If you just go on the outskirts of Delhi towards, say, UP or Haryana or even Rajasthan, you will find many of these things now happening, not just the not just the industrial centers, but also the pre-designed cities that you're talking about. So clearly there is a lot of thinking happening there. But I must compliment you for the book that you have written. It's very contemporary. It is certainly something that people must take some cues from of where this is going. Governments, academics, as well as those of us like us who are interested in migration and population. I have enjoyed reading this book. I'm sure our viewers and readers will also enjoy this. Good luck for your book launch whenever that happens. I suppose it has happened. This is a book launch. I'm
This
taking
is
it as
it.
a book launch. This is it.
It is.
So all the best to you, and we'll keep writing more, and we will of course keep calling you once in a while when we have an appropriate subject for you on our channel. Thanks for
I
joining.
appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nitin.
Thank
Keep
you.
in touch.
Yes, thank you. So, viewers, do read the book. Every week we try and bring you a book and give you recommendations. This is something that you must read, because this is about how the world is going to look like in the next 20 to 30 years, and where your children, your grandchildren will move and work and enjoy. That's about the future of the world as far as the migration is concerned. But do keep watching Strat News Global and our weekly feature Books Corner. And of course, you know where to reach us. Tell your family, friends to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, support us whenever you can, whenever you want to. For the moment, it's goodbye.